A very good evening to all of you, the 16th day of August. And as I sit here under the starry night, I can hear the sounds of drums beating nearby because apparently this is a day of Jamdagni Rishi, a very mythical figure, the father of Parshuram, being celebrated in this little village that I'm in the village of Jonga. So the myths never leave us. They are narratives that are repeated. They are stories that are repeated. We pass them on from generation to generation. And it gives me so much of pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Alok Tripathi, who I've known for a very long time. Dr. Alok Tripathi, I first met him when I was a student of history. And I don't know, Dr. Tripathi, if you remember this, but I had come with my professor, Dr. Nayanjot Lahiri from Delhi University for a few days to Rakhigadi. And you were there, and that was my first tryst with an actual excavation. And little did I know that that experience would lead me on to the world of archaeology myself. And I kept in touch with you, and I was very inspired by the work you do always. When I met you with Dr. S.V. Gupta, and it's always been such a delight knowing about your work and about you, about all that you have done. You've also given lectures in my own class at UCLA via Zoom. So technology then and technology now has been really helpful in bringing all of us together on such platforms like Zoom. So Dr. Alok Tripathi, for those of you who know him very well, and as Dr. Anjali Kapila just mentioned, that you have been so closely involved with Dr. Malik's 3 volumes, and I'm definitely going to procure them for the library here. I would love you to talk about those too. Dr. Tripathi was a former superintending archaeologist at the Archaeological Survey of India. He's presently a professor at Assam University. He was also the former head of the Underwater Archaeology Wing with the Archaeological Survey of India. He completed his PhD at MS University of Baroda in Vadodara. He studied his PG diploma in archaeology at the Institute of Archaeology, his master's at Jivaji University in Gwalior. Dr. Tripathi has excavated at Bangaram Island, the Lakshadweep, Dwarka, and so many famous and not so famous sites. And today we will get a window into his world about myths, epics, and archaeology. So with that, Dr. Tripathi, please take on the mic and lead us into your world.
So everyone, see, it's a very interesting topic, something which is very related or very unrelated, how you look at it. So when you talk about myth, a category which is created by Western educated people. If you talk about itihas, then there is no question of a myth and itihas, because it has a definition that whatever has happened is itihas. And if you read Mahabharata, which is one of the epic, the greatest epic, and it numerous times it writes and the author calls it itihas. They don't call it a Mahakavya or they don't call it a myth. So this category of myth has been created when British started looking Indian itihas from Western point of view. And I'll be touching certain aspects on that. Let me tell you, I am learning in this way because I am a professional archaeologist, now professor of history. And my interest, because I have worked on certain sites which are mentioned in Ramayana and Mahabharata. I am fortunate to have carried out extensive excavations at Dwarika, that so-called the legendary city which is mentioned in Mahabharata, and that was established by Lord Krishna. And it got submerged, as the ancient literature mentions, after his death. So when I started underwater archaeology, I started from Dwarika. And then from as the head of underwater archaeology wing, I carried out excavations there. So that is one site which is mentioned in Epic where I carried out archaeological studies. I was also fortunate, being in the Archaeological Survey of India, to get associated with excavations at Ayodhya from the headquarters, because I was posted in excavation and exploration wing, and then as also with another very sensitive case related to Ram Setu. And being the underwater archaeologist in the ASI, I was very closely related from Ministry of Culture to that. And again, that is something which is mentioned in Ramayana. So that is how I got in touch with these sites. But when I work in the field, I work as an archaeologist. And to me, there is nothing like myth, because an archaeologist believes only in the material evidence. So if we find the evidence, we interpret it as an archaeologist and try to find out what has happened. And if there is no evidence, then the question does not arise. But let me just touch this myth aspect. Of course, there is a lot of literature on myths and mythology. And let me accept that I have not read much on mythology, because that not has been my interest. But I generally, as a teacher or as a common man or a researcher, I find there are always three things. Like I give an example, three is a very important, like we call our time: past, present, and future. So past is gone, future is an imagination, we live in the present. Similarly, the three lok, Akash, Dharti, and the Bhulok or Patal. Then again, we are in the middle. So this Madhyam Marg is always very good, fruitful, and it leads to the success. So there are always people, there are group of people who believe the moment you say Ramayana or Mahabharata, they will say, "Oh, a historian need not to talk about them," because they are myth, they are purely literature, pure imagination, and there is nothing like history. On the other hand, there is a group which believes that every letter written in ancient text is the reality. These are two extreme ends of interpretation or reading or learning from the literature. But I believe that they are literature, of course, they are kavya, because Ramayana is called Adi Kavya, the very first kavya, and Mahabharata is the greatest kavya. But the incidents mentioned there and all these stories, you call them a story or you call them itihas, it gives us lot of information about the past. And as an archaeologist, I find a lot of information which are very precise. At the same time, there are certain adjectives and they are going to happen. We know when you are writing a kavya, you have to use certain alankar. You have to use particular type of chand. And then there you have a restriction. You cannot say exactly what you are saying. And that is very common even today when we speak. Every word is not true. For example, I went through the newspaper. Definitely, I do not went through. Or in Hindi, we can say, ये रास्ता दिल्ली जाता है. We know the rasta kahin nahi jata hai, but this is the way of saying. So now if you say ki this is all imagination, road was moving, road was not moving, this is the way of saying. So when if you read the ancient literature, you should know that what is the intention of the author, and you have to take that. And there lies the real problem. Once you start literary translation of everything written, then it will be definitely misleading. And if you read, forget about, and the problem again comes when you read anything in isolation. For example, Arthashastra, that is a historical text. We know about it. There is no dispute. And when it talks about Chakravartin Kshetra, so it's 1,000 yosan, Shahastra yosan. And we know the yosan, that is around 12 point something kilometer. So 12,000 kilometer area. And we know the length and breadth of India is not 12,000 kilometers. But the intention of the author is to tell a large area, an extremely large area. So Sahastra Yojan is not exactly 1,000 Yojan distance. So if you look at these texts and take out the historical information, the facts from there, it is going to lead you to Itihas. But if you start translating each and every word and then arguing on them, that it says like this and it is possible, it is not possible, then it leads to a area where you cannot draw any conclusion. So while talking about epics, we have to keep in the mind that there are many things which are written in a certain way, and as an historian or an archaeologist, we have to take the historical facts or the realities from there. And I feel these all problems have started when we started looking things from Western point of view. And that is something which need serious discussions and serious thinking. Because perception and language, these are two very important things when we talk about itihas. I use word itihas. I don't prefer the word history, because again, if you read the history, which is something based on the literary documents, means written records, and we know we have earliest written documents, readable documents, which are not more than 2,600 years old. So we cannot say that history of India starts from 6th century BC only. Definitely, history of India is much more older. So therefore, we have itihas. And then again, means I try to think about these terms like prehistory. If you go by the word prehistory, means something beyond before the history. So that is not part of the history, whereas that is a part or a phase of history itself. So this term itself is a problematic, and this perception is the main thing, and the language is another problem. And then what happens? Just 2 days back, I was listening Professor Romila Thapar. She gave a very good presentation. I really appreciate the way she explained the thing. And very rightly, she says, but around 200 years, around 2 centuries back, this all starts when British started writing history. And she put a very important question that while using the source, we have to try to find out what is the intention of the writer. That is a good thing, but it happens only in one section. When you read ancient text, then question comes that you have to be careful about the intention of the author. But when you read the foreign accounts or the things written by the British authors, then generally it is taken as a gospel truth. And here lies the real problem. And unfortunately, history has been taught in a very different way in India. Generally, when you say history, people will think it's the political history. Some stories about the kings, their wars, their some inscription and few dates. Whereas history itself is a very broad subject, because the entire knowledge of humankind is nothing but the history, because that all belongs to the past. So whatever we have learned, whatever we have done, whatever we have written, that is all related to the past, because we present is a fraction of a second and future is an imagination. So what exists is only the his itihas. Therefore, itihas is a very wider field, whereas we have made it a very narrow area with the political history of few dynasties. Again, because the perception has been created in such a way. And the history students are generally taught in such a way that they don't question, they generally quote the earlier authors. So if somebody writes something wrong, then it is start. And I want to give you again one example before I come on history and archaeology, that how this history was created. I won't name an British officer. He is a very famous person. So he was a major in one of the princely state, and one lieutenant was working on an archaeological site. So this major goes to that site and he digs many monuments and collect large numbers of archaeological remains, relics. And this was done in such a hurried manner that the day he reaches there, within few hours, he recovered these relics digging a monument. After some time, he write an article which is published in Asiatic Society Journal, where he claims that he has carried out a systematic archaeological research and he has found that. After some time, let me tell you, it was an illegal act because the person even was not posted in that state. So he comes from somewhere else without any permission from the state or from any authority. He digs these relics, take it away, and he take them away to England. And now they are in the museums. And then after few years, the famous authorities like Ferguson and another famous archaeologist, they mention his work as a very systematic archaeological research conducted on a site. And since it was written by famous, well-known figures, then till date, everybody is writing that he is a pioneer who has done very systematic archaeological research there. And whatever he has written become part of history. And very recently, two papers have published, one by a foreign author, another by an Indian author, an extensive work. And both the works praise this man's work. So I just want to tell you one incident. A antique hunter is being praised by scholars as a great archaeologist who has done a very systematic work. And why it is happening? Because this all was written by British, it was followed by Indians, and it was in English, so it was taken truth because it is published in Asiatic Society journals. So how it can be wrong? But if that is the case of Ramayana or Mahabharata, then that become a problem. And I tell you another example of this. You know, there is a body, Indian History Congress, Indian ICHR, Indian Council of Historical Research, which every year sanction hundreds of projects for research scholars, teachers, and these are very small projects, and all sorts of topics people work on that. But a project was submitted there on archaeological investigation at Ram Setu. This was one like hundreds of other projects, but it became so problematic to a group of historians that Indian History Congress passed a resolution that government should not waste money on a project like archaeological study of Ram Setu. So now you can understand, we are talking about epics, we are talking about history, we are talking about archaeology. Whereas most historian or a large number of historian have a basic problem with the epics themselves. That if you want to do any historical study or if you want to do any archaeological investigation on the areas or on the subjects which are mentioned in epics, it is unprofessional, or it is biased, or it is right, or it is left, or something like that. So you keep this thing in the mind in very beginning, that talking about history, archaeology, and epics, when almost no work has been done, and whereas a lot of work could have been done. As I have told earlier, an archaeologist speaks on the basis of only on the material evidence. So if an investigation is conducted anywhere, and if you don't find any archaeological remains, you can say with authority that there is no historical evidence or no archaeological remains. But you have not done any study, you have not done any investigation, and you have believed that they are myth. This is the real problem when we talk about the places, persons, and events mentioned in epics. So, friend, before rejecting or before accepting, it is necessary to investigate them. And that is what I would try to talk about. So, I'm not going to talk about the details of what these epics are, what all is written there, but there are certain things which seems logical. For example, Mahabharata talks about, because again, the another thing is the date we talk about, the date of these events. Now, the problem of date comes when we started looking Indian events, which is mentioned in Indian texts, with the Gregorian calendar or from the Western dating point. So when we started counting in the years and the months that way, the problems comes. Indians earlier had no problem because they had their own system of dating. Scientific or unscientific, right or wrong, I am not talking about, but they had their own system of calculation. They were called calculating they whether whatever good Manvantar, Yug, and all kind of things, yugas and all. So they had their system. They were counting in that, and they were passing this information from one generation to next generation, and everything was fine. But when you started calculating in the years and months in AD and BC, then problems started coming because it was not fitting from your point of view. And the problem was that those who were trying to see these things were genuinely not interested in understanding. I'm very firm about it with my readings and with my work. There's those who tried to write the history of India initially. They believe that Indians do not have a sense of history. And so they have to write our history, and they were writing our history without knowing anything about our history. And they have an intention, what Professor Thapar has mentioned, that we have to see what was their motive. And they wanted, and let me tell you, I appreciate the British administrators, that they were very clever. They could understand that how they could rule on Indian minds and on India. So very systematically, they cut off from our culture, from our tradition, from our language. So we even can't read, even I don't know the Sanskrit, I can't read even the ancient text. I have to depend on the translations, either in Hindi or in English. And in translation, I find what a person is, another person is thinking. I really cannot go to the details which is required to understanding the things. And now those who are expert in Sanskrit and those who are expert historian and archaeologists, they don't sit together, they don't discuss to really understand and interpret it. So there is a big gap, and this gap was very systematically created. As a result, now we read whatever is being written in English, and today we are discussing in English, which is definitely not my language. And then we have to find out certain words which are convenient, and these words may not be expressing even what I want to, what I'm feeling and what I want to express. So this is how these epics became so-called mythology. But when I search in them historical information, I find them. When I go to the site and explore there, I find the archaeological remains. So to me, there doesn't seems to be mythology in all. Means it's not that everything is imagination. There may be, as I'm telling you, it's a kavya. They have used different chand. They have put shloks. So for giving, they have to use alankars. And as an historian, I have to understand that what I really require from them, and that I get it. I'm not going about the details of Ramayans, you know, I am not going about the size of this. I am just going to relate about this systematic scientific efforts to understand what is written in them and to find out. You may be aware when we talk about uh, historicity in that there have been very limited work, and whatever work has been done, they have been an individual efforts and very sketchy work. It was in the beginning of 20th century that people started finding the events and the places mentioned in the epics and relating them with or identifying them with the places, existing places. And we know the number of places which are mentioned in Mahabharata still exist, be it Mathura or Ahishatra, Hastinapur or Dwarika, and similarly in Ramayana, Nasik, Shangaverpur, Ayodhya, and Lanka. Of course, there have been a lot of debates about it. And once this correlation was made, then different opinions start pouring in. There were a group which said this is all just an imagination and there is no relation. But there were some who believed that there is some relation between the places which are existing, and all the eminent scholars of that time, whether it is Professor Sankalia or Professor B.B. Lal, Dr. Mirashi, they wrote about it and they try to interpret, they try to identify it. And in the second half of 20th century, people started try to find the archaeological remains. And excavation on many of these sites were taken. But again, they were not with an intention to prove the historicity of epics. It was only one project which was carried out by Professor B.B. Lal, that was on the historicity of Ramayana and Bharat, where he carried out excavation on a number of archaeological sites. Again, once we should understand one thing, archaeology has its own limitations, and findings, archaeological findings, does not disprove anything. Based on the findings or the remains, they may prove certain aspects. And when they conducted excavation on a number of sites, the one common thing which they found was that all the sites which are mentioned in Mahabharata, they revealed a particular kind of culture that is called painted grey ware culture, and which is date goes back to around 1100, 1200 BC. So it goes to second millennium BC. And on all the sites which were mentioned in Ramayana, they found remains, earliest remains were of the NBP period, that is the Northern Black Polished Ware. And this is a kind of pottery which is generally found in North India. And date of NBP is later than the painted grey ware. Again, so when this archaeological investigation started, another debate, because traditionally it is believed that Ram was earlier than Krishna. He is the seventh incarnation and Krishna is the eighth incarnation. He was in Treta Yuga, and the Krishna was in Dwapar Yuga. But the archaeological remains which were found in this excavation was telling something different. But again, this was a one time, one project, and not much work could be done to cross-check it or to do the detailed studies. As I have earlier mentioned, that some time back, talking about epics and history or epics and archaeology was not considered academic at all. People were scared. The moment if you talk about Ramayana and Mahabharata, you will be branded that you belong to a certain group, a particular color, or a particular thinking. So again, even in, I'm talking about independent India, there were serious attempts to block any kind of study pertaining to these epics and the literature. And that is something very serious. And it is again the continuation of British Raj, because the white people have gone but they are still our mind. And I give one example to say here itself that people very use the word post independence because those who created this term again, they felt that India never became independent because any person knows post means after, and India is still independent. So the terminology which is used in the history, it creates some impression in our subconscious mind, which is very dangerous. So this is the effect of English education and English terminology, that they even do not use the term since independent or independent India. They call it post independent. So there was pre independence till 14th August, and from 15th August, it became post independence. And there is no phase of independent India in between. So these are the certain issues. They seems very minor issues, but they are really major issues because they reflect on the perception and how we think, how we work, and how we write. So again, now fortunately we are talking about these issues. People are coming forward. Again, there are different types of claims, but people want to investigate, people want to debate on them, people want to discuss on these issues, and that is a beginning. Now here I'll just talk about two particular sites when we talk about archaeology, the sites where I have been associated. One is Dwarika, which is mentioned in Mahabharata. Another one is Ram Setu, which is mentioned in Ramayana. And why these two sites are important, I just want to tell you, because all of the sites which are mentioned in these epics are the sites which were existing before these incidents happened, and they continue to exist. Be it Mathura, where the Kans was ruling and the Krishna was born, so the city was existing there. We do not know for how many centuries, and then after Krishna also, it till date it exists there. So even if you do archaeological investigation on such sites which have multicultural deposits, it becomes very difficult to find out which particular levels belong to this particular period. Of course, you can do with a certain type of pottery and other remains as has been done in the Ramayana project and Mahabharata project. But again, there are a lot of deposition and it becomes very difficult. But when we talk about Dwarika, that's a place which even the epics mention that it was established by Krishna when he left Mathura. He moved, went to Dwarika, and then he established the city. And at his death, the city got submerged and it was destroyed. So if you find exact place, location of this place, and you find archaeological remains, so the because it is coterminous with the life of Krishna. So if you find a city as mentioned in epics, then you can say logically that that was the time when this event took place. Same is the case with Ram Setu, because Ayodhya was existing before the Ram was born, and it continued to exist till date. There are many other places. If you talk about Panchavati, it was a jungle in the forest. They had a hut, so you are not going to find the archaeological remains if you think logically. And all other places which were existing there, they continue to exist there. Of course, there is a big debate about identification of Lanka, whether this Lanka is the Lanka or not. But there is a structure between Sri Lanka and Rameshwaram, which is identified traditionally as Ram Setu. And again, this structure is said to be constructed by Ram to cross from India to Sri Lanka, and it was built during his time. So these are the two. One is a structure, another one a city or a site, which are exactly the coterminous with these two personalities. And I was fortunate to work at Dwarika. We carried out exploration, and this morning I had another lecture where I have discussed that Dwarika excavation in detail. The issue is that We know the site, we know the mound, but the highest point where generally archaeologists feel the ancient most structure or the maximum deposit exists is stand the main temple of Dwarikadhish. So practically it is not possible to excavate in the center of the mound. And so far, whatever work has been done, there has been a very little work from Deccan College and Gujarat State Archaeology, Archaeological Survey of India, and the underwater archaeology wing of the ASI in a very limited one corner of the mount. And whatever work is done, at least it proves that for 2000 years the place is inhabited. Now we need to go beyond that and we have to find out other areas whether some earlier settlement existed there or not. But that is true that this place has been associated with Krishna because we are even finding the remains a number of successive activities of construction of temples right from the late Gupta period. So if not, because right now whatever done, as I have mentioned, archaeology does not disprove something. It proves that at least for last more than 1,000 years, this place has been identified. It has been associated with Krishna, and there have been successive activities and related with this religious. So this place had a religious importance for last more than 1,000 years, at least whatever work is done. And let me tell you, what work has been done is very limited work. A trench of 5 meter by 5 meter, when you start digging, when you reach to the bottom, hardly you get 1 meter by 1 meter area. So you can imagine even you cannot sit properly and work there. So if you want to work on a issue or a problem like Ramayana and Mahabharata, you have to do extensive archaeological investigations and excavation, where with the help of these remains you can say something. But it proves. And then there is a legend that what written in the Musal Parv of Mahabharata, that city was submerged. Based on that, there have been certain investigation in the past, and it was claimed that there are submerged city. And when we did underwater investigations there, we found that there are structural remains under water. Now, these fragment of buildings, they are lying underwater on the bottom of the sea. And I can show you some of the pictures of that. I have certain slides I'll show you at the end. So they are there. Now, the question of dating is still not solved because these are stone blocks, big in size, and we have not found anything so far which could be dated scientifically. Though in our excavation we have found certain remains, a wooden block and all, which need to be dated, which can give some idea about the date of this structure. So, but two things are clear that we found deposition on the site. So the Dwarika, which is existing in Jamnagar district of Gujarat, it is an ancient place. It was associated with religious activities. We have found a number of successive structure in excavation right from the late Gupta period and till the existing temple. So that suggests that that has been there. When we talk about on the other side of the coast, on the eastern coast at Rameshwaram, then again we find the antiquity of Ram Setu is almost 1,500 years old. And we have numerous evidence that people believed, I use word believed, because for at least 4,500 years that this structure was constructed by Ram, and they have been worshipping it, they have faith in it. It is mentioned in a number of inscriptions starting from and these inscriptions are not only in the southern kings, this Chol and all, but even in a king in the in Rajasthan. And Srinathji temple, you have an inscription which mentions about that. And this structure, whether it was constructed by Ram or not, but this structure was as important as Himalaya in the north. Because in geographical term, whenever the length and breadth of the country is said, they say from Setu to Himalaya. So it was such a well-known landmark. Again, forget about who constructed it, but this structure in history of India has such a significant place that it was such a well-known place that people used to call it, means to say something in the south, they used to take it as a landmark, as they take in Himalaya in the north. So we have numerous references in literature. I'm talking about secular literature, not the religious. So even in different texts, they mention about it. The kings mention about their extension of their kingdom up to the Setu. And then when they talk about the extension of the country, Bharatvarsh, they say from this place to this place, and they mention it. There are numerous inscription where in different sense Ram Setu has been mentioned. It has a number of uh, different names also, and there are coins which mention Setu coins in Sri Lanka as well as in the southern India, in Pamban area. And there has been scientific studies which tells about they have found coral remains on the land. So it suggests that there has been sea level fluctuations. So, and then all underwater marine environmental studies. So if you study, it becomes a very important structure. And archaeologically, when we say anything which is 100 years old is an archaeological monument or a site. So this is a place at least which is definitely has an antiquity more than 1500 years old. Now I'm not saying that 1500 years back is the time of Ramayana. Forget, just keep it aside. I'm talking about the archaeology. So this is something which is mentioned in Ramayana because Valmiki Ramayana mentioned, it gives a great detail about how this Ram Setu was constructed. What are the trees which were used, what kind of material, and how they were carrying the stones, rocks, wood, how they were laying it, and then they were maintaining the straight with using the threads. Then how means how much length of the bridge was constructed. I'm not saying it is word to word true. And again, it says its length was 100 yojan, and we know it's 30 kilometer. We can measure it today. So again, because when a poet writes it, 100 yojan does not mean that it is a 1,000 kilometer, but a very large bridge or a very large structure. Part of it may be of natural shoals, maybe there are gaps which were filled and used, but that all can be done only once we do the systematic study. So the point is, if we are genuinely interested in knowing the historicity of these events and places, we will have to do serious archaeological and historical study of these places. And after doing that, if we say that it's an imagination, everybody will be ready to accept it. But before doing anything, if we simply take them a mythology because it is written in ancient text where name of some gods and goddesses comes or there are some other incidents are coming, so whatever written in them is just a mythology. That's not a scientific approach, and no educated person will accept that. Forget about that north and south. I have talked about these two important sites. I am posted in Assam, and there is a mention of Pragjyotish, and I was studying in that context. Let me tell you, I have not studied these epics from beginning to end, cover to cover, because that is not my intention. I am not an expert of that. But when I am working on a particular site or a particular area, and when I want to find certain references, then definitely I go to them and I study them, those relevant portions. And when I study about the Pragjyotish, I find what links they had with the rest of the country. Because right now, Northeast India is almost uh, away from the mainland, and there is a feeling that even people in Northeast India, they say mainland and Northeast India. But if you read Mahabharata, you will find that what close relation this mainland has with the Pragjyotish. The king of Pragjyotish was such a powerful king that he was as mighty and as powerful as any other king of. Even if you see his activities during the Mahabharat war, even if you accept it, it's a poetic imagination. But then also a person who is writing in North India is mentioning about areas of Northeast. And I don't find it's an imagination because the kind of material which he is using, and I find archaeologically that they did exist there, and he's talking definitely of the reason because the material gifts he's tributes he's bringing, the kind of activities he's doing, they are typical to Northeast. I can just give you one example. It Mahabharat mentions that the king was so means he was very old. So keeping to keep his eyes open, he tied a cloth of silk. And you know, Assam is famous for silk even today, and that is a very precious cloth. And then it has a very detailed description that how Arjun cut this cloth and then his eyes get closed and then he dies. So if you see his role, you will find that Prag Jyotish was playing a very important role. Now I'm not talking only based on the Mahabharata. If you see the Gupta inscription, Prayag Prasasti, you find the mention of Pragjyotish. Forget about that. Even that's quite late. If you go to the Yashovarman's inscription in Mandsaur, you will find mention of Pragjyotish. So, what historical evidence you are finding in later stages, the same thing you are finding in Mahabharata. So, how can you say, which is definitely of much earlier period, there is a debate and discussions about its dating people, but take it around 3rd century BCE. So, even if it is of the early centuries of Common Era, then also it is mentioning certain things which you find later on supported by other inscriptional and historical evidences. So how can you say that whatever is written in Mahabharata is only a myth? No, that is not. Only thing is if you look at the things in isolation, you may find it that they are myth. But if you seriously study them, if you analyze them, if you correlate with existing thing and all other finds, you will find that whatever is written has got some historical truth. I'm saying some historical truth. I'm not saying it is true word to word, but these epics contain lot of historical information. And as an historian and as an archaeologist, we are supposed to take those information out and use it for interpretation or for identification of the sites or material or periods, or for that matter, dating method. Dating is something I'm not going in that. There are certain scholars who claim that they have dated these events based on different calculations. But as an archaeologist, I won't comment on that because unless I have material evidence, I will not be saying anything. And again, the approach generally we find among some of the scholars, they do not take everything in consideration. They will take certain selected things which suits to them. Even when they do certain calculations, they say there are around 200 mention of dates and I have selected some 6 or 10 or 20 on the basis of which I do. And that is something which is really problematic because you cannot discard a part of it simply because it doesn't suits you. So we need to do a lot of work. And as an historian or as an archaeologist, my only point is that whatever is written in ancient text, here we are talking about the epics. First, we have to understand it, and then we have to find it out whether it contains certain historical facts or not. There may be certain adjectives. We will have to understand that. So what is it is called neer cheer vivek. So milk and water you have to separate, and it's a difficult task, but that is the job of an archaeologist or historian to do. So simply you cannot say it's all history. Simply you cannot say it's all mythology. And this concept of mythology comes, as I told you, with this English education where anything which is indigenous, which is called ancient. This word, even there are many things which I discussed with the students. The very terms which has been given, they all were designed. You know, like you said, ancient history. People don't find anything wrong in ancient, but if you read the British papers, they say anything which is indigenous called ancient. And ancient again has a some in our subconscious. If you ask anyone, you want an old thing or you want a new thing, everybody will go for new. So we all go for towards the modern. And when the modern period starts, the British won a war, and then India become modern. You know, so the problem is our foundation has the problem. Unless we deal with these issues, which generally are not seen above the surface. So these are the problems deep inside. So if we really want to make our history proper, I'm using word history because I'm speaking in English, I call itihas. So if we really want to write systematic scientific itihas, we will have to deal with certain these problems which are in the foundation. They are not visible. We'll have to go very deep inside. And if we can handle it, I'm not, as an archaeologist, as I'm saying again and again, as an archaeologist, I only speak on the basis of evidence, nothing beyond. And I will not even suggest anything beyond that. So, but only thing is we have to find those evidence. For finding the evidence, we have to read and understand these texts. And unfortunately, since we do not understand the language in which it is written, we are unable to do that. So unless we read them, unless we understand them, unless we investigate them, saying anything about them will not be an appropriate thing, will not be a scientific thing. And as I am saying with my very little experience, when I search certain things in the epics, I find lot many useful informations, and those informations fits properly with the material evidence with this reason. So this is very brief I wanted to tell you. And if viewers are interested, I can show you some pictures of Dwarika, the work we carried out there on the land and underwater. So if the host can convey, then I can share certain images if you would like to see that.
Of course, we would be very happy to, and you can share the screen. We're really looking forward to that.
This is an image of Dwarika from the sea. At the background, you can see this is the famous temple of Dwarikadhish, which is one of the four dhams. And on the shore, there is a small temple called Samudra Narayan Temple. And here is a river, a small rivulet that is called Gomati. And this river meets the sea here. And the ancient texts mention that Dwarika was located where river Gomati joins the sea. So it's a location tally with the ancient description given in ancient literature. And this is the area where we carried out underwater investigations to investigate the submerged remains in sea. I'll just show you some of. This is the location on the extreme western point on this tip. This town is located. It is in district Jamnagar of Gujarat. And this is a temple which is of the 15th, 16th century. This is the last, it's called the sixth temple constructed at this site. Earlier temples are also there, their remains are there. And this is inside, you have the image of Dwarikadhish. It's an old painting which shows how the town was, and it was a fortified town. In the center, on the top point, you have this temple. And that is what I was talking about. Since the center of the mound is covered under, means which is under the temple, it is not possible to conduct excavation. Generally, archaeologists excavate on the highest point so that they can get the complete sequence of the cultural deposits. So that is not possible in case of Dwarika. What we have done, we have worked on the periphery. On the one side, beyond the temple, there was a small place where the excavation was conducted. And this place was an ancient port, which is mentioned in the travel accounts. And it is also, we have found a lot of stone anchors, etc., which proves that this place has been an active port. This is the temple. There were a lot of structures all around. So when some of these structure was demolished, below that some ancient temple was found. This is one of them. And by the side, some excavation was conducted, and there are other temples also, which are earlier than this temple. This is our team, a few young girls and boys who helped me in the underwater archaeology. This is a Indian Navy ship. We worked in collaboration with Indian Navy. So it's a survey ship which is having a state of the art equipments for doing underwater hydrographic survey, INS Nirdeshak. And these are the survey boats which are fitted with the survey equipments. At the bottom you can see that is called multi-beam sonar, which sends the uh, energy waves which goes down, and then they are reflected and they are collected on a computer, and then this data is collected and then drawn in the charts. So this is how we carried out, explored this whole area very close to the modern town of Dwarika in the sea. This is the Arabian Sea, and then all this data was captured on computer. And this is how you get the anomalies or reflection or the difference of heights at the bottom. And wherever we found any target or an important sites, we carried out diving, went down and to verify whether it's of archaeological importance or not. So all these data from different instruments were captured, and then we could make a detailed bathymetric map. And here you can see the a paleo channel, whereas the river is flowing now. So this is the present channel, but in the past, river was flowing somewhere here. So there has been some change or movement in the past and the present. And then we could do a lot of studies in detail. We made the three-dimensional terrain model to study and find out the location where there can be a possibility of finding the structures and the thing. We also carried out excavation on the land very close to this old temple. And then when we removed the soil, immediately we started getting a lot of structures of different periods. And this all was done by the well-educated, trained archaeologists and historians. Very minutely, all the evidence were collected. Then our team, all the postgraduate students who carried out archaeological investigations, and then very slowly, very systematically, we went down. Everything was documented precisely with the measurement. This is how the drawings are prepared when we document. And then we went down deep, almost 10 meters. And this is how what we got, a little space, because as you go down, you find many structures that reduce your area of work, and then keep on digging, and then you go slowly down inside. And that is the lowest portion where ladder is kept. It's a rock. So there is a bedrock at around 10-meter depth, below which there is no possibility of finding any artifacts or human activity. So this is the only area we could get for systematic excavation. That's why I'm saying that if we want to study the cultural deposits at Dwarika or any other sites, we have to do a lot more investigation in different parts of the mounds. And then we found a lot of artifacts right from modern to the very early historical period. These are some terracotta figurine, iron objects, stone objects. This ring made of carnelian stone, the bone and ivory objects. This dais is made of coral, which is also available. Different kinds of beads, glass, different stones, terracotta, bone, ivory, and a large quantity of pots, the pottery which we find in every excavation. And then we carried out very systematic slow digging, and we have collected a lot of botanical remains, a good number of geological sediments, so that we can reconstruct the whole environment of the site and all other activities about the nature of the sites. Then we moved in the sea, and then we carried out this our diving boat with which we used to go to the site. The team of divers from Indian Navy and from Archaeological Survey of India. And these are the places what you find this float. It marks the structure there underwater. And these are the equipments used by us, scuba gears. This is a compressor. We had a communication system so that the person working underwater can communicate with the person sitting on the boat. And for documentation, we have cameras. And this is how we used to remain in touch with the person working on the bottom of the sea. This is the area which is where these investigations were carried out. So it was properly marked. This is how the archaeologists work. They properly mark the area, then divide it in proper squares, and then mark it so that you can identify where the exact these remains are found. So once when you go down, you see this kind of material. Everything is overgrown with the vegetation. There is a thick vegetation cover, and whenever any important structure is noticed, a buoy or a float is tied so that one can go there, and it is numbered. So you know which structure you are talking about or where you have to walk. So these buoys mark the submerged structure underwater. And this was our floating platform where all activities were carried out. And these are the structures underwater. This is how the area is properly marked before we start working on the bottom. And then this vegetation was removed to see the kind of the nature of these remains. So it is a very difficult task because there is a very thick calcareous deposition, and then above that there is a vegetational growth because these remains are lying underwater for a long time. And after cleaning it, then you start seeing these huge stone blocks. And definitely these are not natural stone. When you see them, you can definitely say these are building blocks. Here you can see. So to have the joints, they have proper cuttings, they have same thickness, same breadth, so that they were part of buildings, certain structures. And we had a number of them. These are all after cleaning, then you get it. They are square, rectangular, and a structure like this, a semicircular, and we had certain structures close to the shore where such structures were used, or such stones were used. These are the big building blocks. So we could find a good number of structural remains lying underwater on the bottom of the sea. And some of them were having a number of courses, like 1, 2, 3, 4. Maximum we found was the 4 courses. Like this, you have a very fine joints, and then the same thickness of the stone blocks. Here you see these 3 courses. This scale, each division is of 10 centimeter. So this thickness of is around 20 centimeter of each. This is a close joint of a submerged structure. So these all structures were properly studied, they were measured, the measurements were taken, their drawings were prepared. That is a common practice archaeologists do, whether it is on land or underwater. Again, this was used for preparing the drawing. And then we carried out a little digging by the side of this structure. And in that, we could find that these structures were not having the foundation. So it means they are not in their place. They are the broken part of structures. They are lying on the bottom of the sea. And then we also carried out excavation in this area, which is called intertidal zone. During high tide, this area is covered with the seawater, and during low tide, when the water recedes, this get exposed. So here we had a very limited time to do the excavation. So it is not really possible to do the real kind of archaeological excavation where you systematically dig slowly. So we within that given time we had to do our job, and we could find this kind of circular structure. Here you can see we tried a lot to dig underwater, and means under the water is this. We could trace six such courses, and it still continues. So it goes down. We could not reach to the bottom of this structure because the time is very limited, and by the time we reach there, the water start increasing, and then it brings with it the all sand and material, and then it get deposited. Again, we remove it, and again that get filled. So the deepest we could go was up to the six courses, but it still continues, and it is possible to go and sometimes see by using some other methods. This is a similar kind of a structure which was partly broken. When we cleaned it thoroughly, because it was exposed from both the sides, where at the bottom of this we could get a very important evidence, and that is a wooden block. And that was a big find for us because wood can be dated scientifically. So, so far we had no material which could be dated scientifically to find out the date of this structure. But here we had one evidence. If it is dated, then we can get the exact date of when this tree was cut, not when this structure was made. So we would be able to have a scientific date once it is dated. This all remains which are excavated from Dwarika are in the possession of Archaeological Survey of India, as the excavation was carried out by them. So a brief report was also published. So these are a few images which I wanted to share about the work we did. And when we worked at Dwarika, we could say that yes, what is written in the text indicates us to a site where we could find certain archaeological remains. Of course, the date is still not finalized, and that is still debatable, that what is the size of means what is the date of that. So but as I have told again, the best way is to find the reality or truth or historical facts, whatever is written in ancient text. So, and unless we examine them historically, archaeologically, and from other sources, we cannot say whether they are history or they are myth. Before giving our opinion, we have to do a lot of work, and that work has yet to be done. And I think if we work seriously, one day we will be able to say it with confidence that epics are having historical information or they are a myth. So I stop here. If you have any suggestion or comments, I will be very happy to learn from all of you.
Thank you so much, Alokji, for your wonderful talk. And of course, it takes us all archaeologists back to what we love most, the field. And we are away from the field thanks to the pandemic. And I pray that all of us are able to, come out of this and go to our beloved field sites and do more work. And thank you so much for telling us the importance of excavations for those in the audience who are not archaeologists. That archaeology is such an important field to understand history, and how you talk about itihas is also very, very important to us Indians. And we have been having these discussions for the past few weeks. We are talking about how these terms that we use are so important, because they have to be revisited. And what you said about history, that you make a distinction, you prefer calling it itihas, and that's what we need to rewrite things, to understand things as they are, and not as we have kind of received them from our historical past. So with that, let's take a few questions. Those of you who wish to ask questions, please raise your hands. We have the first question from Dr. Nandini Bhattacharya Panda. Ma'am, you can take over the mic.
It is a very fascinating study. I'm not an archaeologist, I'm a historian. I just have the question, I mean, when you are like digging and in the ocean, and in Mahabharata there is a reference of river, so how would you construct that, how it became, the Varka became submerged, and how, I mean, I'm sure if when something is submerged, it is carried further by the flow of the river or by the ocean. So do you use, or is there any lens? I'm completely a lay person, that's why I'm asking that a camera, a lens that can indicate something underneath the layer. This is one thing, this is my question. And second is, you were referring to Northeast India over and over again. I have some, because I'm working on Northeast India for some time, I mean, Northeast India is, I mean, this is a very loosely, culturally, strategically produced term or category, or geopolitical, geopolitical category. During the British period, there was nothing called Northeast India. At some point of time, Prabjyotish was part of Bengal, as that time part of Orissa was also part of Bengal. So this, geopolitical mapping, it varied. So, I mean, there was nothing called Northeast India. And thirdly, actually, this is, I'm intrigued. While one read the philosophy for Nefa by Verrier Elwin, there is a reference that Arunachal, there is a mount, and he feels that was Vidarbha, that is referred in the Mahabharata. So I should end there. Thank you very much. It's a very fascinating presentation.
Okay. So I'm in a history department, but my background of history is very late, but I'll be happy to have a discussion with you. See, first thing is about the submergence. There can be various causes of submergence. Generally, when people talk about, the term people use sea level rise, it is not always sea level rise. It is sea level fluctuation, and that can be because of many factors. Either the sea level is rising or land has gone down, there are certain tectonic activities, or there may be some other natural phenomena. So we really do not know that what has happened. After the tsunami, people started saying there would have been, before that tsunami, nobody was talking about it. But once the tsunami came, then many people started looking for there would have been something like tsunami, or there might have been some big cyclone or an earthquake. That is, every possibility is there. But we can say conclusively, once we find the entire city or or in situ buried structure. Once we find certain structure which are in its own place, and if we study the deposits there, possibly we may find that what was the cause of its submergence. About India, we have not found it, but on a number of other sites in the world, there are places which have got submerged, and the records are also available that there was certain earthquakes or sudden subsidence of the earth, and it has happened, and because of that the settlements have gone down. But in case of Dwarika, we do not have such information, and river has nothing to do with that, because the submergence what is mentioned in Mahabharata, it is because of the sea, because river is a very small river, so it has no role to play in submergence. And the story again, if you go, I am just giving for the information. There is a mention that when Krishna reached on the coast, he requested sea god to give him land, and then sea receded. So what it tells, I'm not saying whether scientific or not. So sea had gone back. So on this reclaimed land, he constructed a city. And after the death of Krishna, then sea came to its original place. So what Mahabharata tells us is that because the sea encroached on the land, so the city got submerged. So that is what the Mahabharata means, what is mentioned in Mahabharata. But we really do not know that what was the cause, because I told you again, see, this work what we have done was limited to a very small area of 50 meter by 50 meter. Working underwater takes a lot of time, and if you have to explore several kilometer area, it requires several years. So we worked in a limited area. We could find submerged structures. We could record the nature of these structures. And I told you, when we did excavation, we did not find the foundations. So these blocks and the pieces which are submerged, they are not in situ there. So therefore, it is difficult to assume or visualize that what had happened. But it's possible. That is one thing. Second thing about Northeast India, I use the term Northeast, but if you read my writings or lecture, I use extreme East. I never use word Northeast. And you are absolutely right, Northeast is a wrong term. And this Northeast concept has come, if you again read the some late means at the time of Aurangzeb, Alamgir Nama's appendix, which mentions to the northeast of Bengal. So this term northeast has come because the seat of sultans were in Bengal. From Bengal, this area, the Assam area, or the old Assam, which comprises all this entire region, was to the northeast from Bengal. And when British came, they were again based in the Calcutta, and from Calcutta this area was northeast. So they used to call it northeastern region. If you see from India, from the center, then it is not. If you see from Delhi, it is actually southeast. If you see from the capital, and if you take length and breadth of India, and from the center, if you take it, it comes to northeast. So definitely it's not northeast. And it was never called northeast as such. It was in 70s, probably 71 or 72. Then Act came, Northeast region, where this term Northeast was assigned. And since then, everybody, as you know, we Indians are very good in following. If anybody says anything without questioning, we start using it. And then it became Northeast. And very recently, even the Sikkim is also added to Northeast, which has no connection at all. So that is all. It's more an administrative term and legal term. So I always call it extreme East, or I prefer the term Prag-Jyotish. And Prag-Jyotish was an independent area right from the beginning. And as I have mentioned, whether it is in Mahabharata or in the Gupta inscriptions or in Yashovarman inscription and in later inscription, that has been an area. And somebody was talking about, and if you see, there are so many traits. I'm not talking about that. Archaeologically, if you study it very minutely, there's no work have been done. You know, there are so many issues. And after the partition of India, again, when the Bangladesh was created, so this region has got somewhat detached from the main landmass. And that if you see the map, that also gives an a notion that Northeast is not so well attached, but that was not the case in the past. It was a very well connected, and there are numerous, and right from, even if you see the Harappan civilization, there was somebody talking about it, and there are indications that they had some sort of connection, whether it is a Carnelian weed going to the Nagas or to the northeast, or the use of silk, even on a number of Harappan sites where they have found silk thread, which is of the variety found in the northeast India. But since no serious archaeological studies have been done and in between, so right now we cannot attach it. But that area has been, means there was contacts right from the very early period. I'm in for belief, and I'm using word belief. Unless I have the evidence, I cannot prove to others. But seeing the many things there, and if you see, then you find that there must have very
I mean, for
means
example, Professor
active
Malik
contact.
also pointed out that Rukmini was from Arunachal Pradesh, whereas Chitrangada was from Manipur. So there was contact very much with, I mean, at least if we read Mahabharata, we can see the contact with what we call now the Northeast.
Yeah, Chitrangada, Hidamba, there are many incidents and the mentions of that Arjun going for Digvijay there. And so we have that all. What I'm saying, these are what written, and but we also, if we can support it as an archaeologist with the archaeological remains and contact, then that will be more convincing. And on that line, not much work has been done, but there is a possibility of finding that. That was I was mentioning. So I believe that there was a very means very well connected, and there was a lot of cultural exchanges, and there was no isolation as such, which people generally feel. Yeah, I agree with you. What you say.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And also, you're talking about directionality, that how it's almost like where you're situated. In America, when you fill up forms, you say, okay, where are you from? East Asia is the option given. It's never South Asia. And to me, in the beginning, it was always like, I'm South Asian, I'm not East Asian. But with the perception of the Americans, I am on their East. So I'm Asian and I'm on the East. So you're very much correct when you say, these directions, like how you use Northeast India today was only for convenience, but you prefer using the word Pragjyotish. So we'll take the next question. Abhishek Kamath, if you could take over the mic and ask your question, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Alok Tripathi. It was a wonderful lecture. I really enjoyed it. I have two questions. My first question is that you've mentioned Dwarka to be a port. As per Romila Thappar's book, I read that Dwarka was also called as Baraka or Varka in the ancient times. So, since it was a port,
Yeah.
did we have any of these other nations, like, I mean, since you've been excavating Dwarka, did you find archaeological evidences about Greek settlement, Sumerian settlement? And also, is there, and since it's more or less related to Mahabharata, did we ever come across anything as a contemporary to Krishna, like something like Megasthenes Heracles, which was I mean, which is also, I don't know, equated to Krishna, just like how the Egyptian god Serapis is to Osiris. So I wanted to know if these things were there. And the second question is, when does a fact become a myth? Since you said that the Mahabharata and Ramayana were considered to be myths by the Britishers, um, but why didn't the Britishers consider the Buddha's Jataka as a myth? Because even in his Jatakas, he mentions that he was Krishna and he was Rama in his previous lives. So how do we come to this conclusion? And yeah, I hope.
Yeah, you have a very pertinent question, and I would, of course, I'll try to give you. That's you're right that in the periplus of Erythraean Sea, there is a mention of Barke, which is identified with Dwarka. But we have not found any settlement as such. If you have seen the slides, I have mentioned Dwarka is a big and very high ancient mound, but it is very thickly populated, and there is no open space available for conducting excavation. So what we could get was a small piece of land that is around 5 meter by 5 meter. And when we went down, you might have seen that hardly we had a space around 70 centimeter by 1 meter to reach to the bottom. So when you are working on such a limited area, what you can do, you can build a chronology, and it becomes difficult to find out or tell much about the settlements. If you want to study settlements, then you need to excavate in a larger area. So what we excavated in that area, we did not find any remains of the Greeks or Romans, but it goes to the early centuries of Common Era, and it's possible to find it. We have, of course, that red polished ware, which is supposed to be means associated with the maritime trade or Roman trade somehow. We found porcelain also there, which is coming from the eastern coast from China, and we found a lot of iron ingots. That is very interesting thing there, and probably iron was exported from there, because you know the Damascus source, so very fine quality of steel was being exported. That what ingots we have found, if we analyze metallurgical studies of the ingots, can tell more about that. That not has been done. Actually, after soon after these excavations were over, I joined university, and all the excavated material is in the stores, and they need to be scientifically analyzed and studied. So there were indications that it was a port, and as I have mentioned, we have found a large number of stone anchors in Dwarika waters. So that proved beyond any doubt that it was an active port and having a very brisk or very active trade with the Arabian coast, Arabian countries. In medieval period, we have those grapnel type of anchors, the long anchors having 4 holes at one end and 2 holes at the another one. So this type of anchors are there. So definitely it was a port, and about being its port is there is no doubt. We have a lot of evidence, and iron is one thing which probably was exported from here. We are having porcelain, and probably we have got a certain pottery which suggests sort of Roman means connection, not very clearly. We did not find Eretine or anything like that, but they are there. So that was there. Now, as far as Krishna is concerned, in our limited excavation, we could not reach to those levels where we can find about Mahabharat period or Krishna or anything. So that's why I am quite on that. And as far as facts and myth, and you talked about Buddhist, that's a very interesting thing, area which I am trying to understand and analyze. Since I have not thoroughly studied, it would not be proper for me to comment on that. But I can just give you for your own thoughts. Just think why British all archaeologists were very keen to study Buddhist monument, whether Western caves of Buddhist caves on the western coast, or the monuments at Sanchi, and the Alexander Cunningham, who started so-called Archaeological Survey of India's first Director General. He followed the trail of the Chinese pilgrim to Buddhist places. He started his work from Sarnath. So there was something, and some of the scholars have written about it. But I will not say those things unless I have a very solid literary or archaeological evidence on that. But I can tell one thing very clearly and very openly, that they had some objective behind that. So their studies were not simply because they were interested in the history of India or they were interested in archaeological monuments of India. They were interested only on a particular kind of monuments and a particular types of sites, and that need to be understood, and that can be done with a thorough study of their writing. And I'm nowadays studying some works on early works on Buddhist monuments, and I hope that I will get a better idea that what really was in their brain. But one thing I very firmly believe, and I'm very confident, that whatever these British officers were doing, you must know they were not historians, they were not archaeologists, they were judges, they were doctors, they were military officers, and they were doing working in particular areas, and they had a particular instruction, particular design, and particular motive to do that. So that one has to understand, and that's why the unfortunate thing, as I mentioned in my general discussion, that we historians simply take whatever is written and we don't try to analyze why. And archaeology in India, even let me tell you, since stops on what, when, and where. Even if you go to National Museum, you find a lot of things displayed there. It is written what the object is, what is the date, means when it was made, and where it was found. It stops there. And if you read any archaeological excavation report, you will find again what, when, and where. They don't go how, why. So these are the questions to us, that why they were investigating or doing these activities on a particular sites. So those motives has to be understood. And once you know the motive, it is the intention which is the most important in any act, not the act itself, but the intention. So we have to
Was
understand that intention.
was it
Yeah.
one of the intentions that I assume that it would be because the Britishers wanted to exercise their hegemony over the Indians, and by subjugating Indian literary evidences like Mahabharata and Ramayana, they had a good handhold on Indian culture, saying that Indian culture was something very diminutive. It didn't have much value, and most of the heroes and the epics mentioned in the conveyed through oral traditions would be, are just myths, and they don't have any evidence about it. Similarly, with the Buddhist thing, they might have actually excavated those areas because Buddhism was already a dying religion. I wouldn't say it's completely died out, but in those times there was very little evidence of Buddhist preachers or any kind of solid foundation as it was for Hinduism. I don't know. I'm just assuming that this must have been the case.
Yeah, you are somewhat near, but I'll keep it for the future. But they had two intention. One, what you were saying, that since there was not much Buddhism had what you call it, it was not so much flourishing. That was one, to their benefit. But they have beyond that they had certain other intentions. Probably in near future I will be coming out in my writing and I would be writing on that. And that is a very important thing, and if you understand them, then it will become very easy to understand that why we changed our path and have gone. And you are absolutely right, because they were a very good administrator and they knew how to rule, and they created a sort of shame in us to to do our own things. So people started feeling ashamed of their own dresses, their own tradition, their own festival, their own language. एंड इवन टुडे अगर हम लोग हिंदी में बात करें तो लगता है कि ये लोग पढ़े लिखे नहीं हैं, और इफ वी टॉक इन इंग्लिश we take a sense of pride that yes, I can speak English or he can speak English. So this is what has happened, and they could successfully do it, and that is the thing. That's You are right, and that's why even after leaving India 73 years before, still they are ruling on us.
Thank
Any other?
Thank you so much. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Thank you. And we have more questions. So I'll take Khalid Barbuia's question. Khalid, you can, if I'm pronouncing the name correctly, if you could take over the mic.
I wanted to ask that about the I have recently studied in R.S. Sharma's book India's Ancient Past there is no contemporary site related to Krishna or Rama in Mathura or Ayodhya respectively. But this has been answered that we should not make mere assumptions without proper investigation, and such investigation is not done properly yet. That's
See, I tell you, see, one thing which we need to understand is, you talked about the title Ancient Past. A past is a past. What is ancient? Now, here just I would like to tell you, when we speak English and we want to know the meaning of any word, we open the dictionary. So we divided our history in ancient period, medieval period, and the modern period. Now, if you just open a dictionary and see what is ancient period, you will have that is not the medieval or modern period or ancient period what we are using in India, because Indian history is different from Greek, Roman, and British history. So we blindly copied the term. And again, I'm saying if you read the British correspondence, you will find the term ancient they use for indigenous practices and indigenous traditions. They say these are ancient. And the term ancient, if you read again in the dictionary, you will find something which is old, which is irrelevant with the present. So when you say this is our ancient past, means this is irrelevant thing. I'm talking beyond conscious, in subconscious. Just offer two toys to your daughter or your granddaughter, an old and a new. And a kid of 3 years or 4 years will go and pick up the new one. He will not take the old. So they created that this is old, this is ancient, this is no more relevant. So automatically you will feel a distance. This is a thing of past, leave it. Now this is the modern history. It is more relevant. So the terminology itself, and then how the things changes that I have pointed out, that they won a war in the Plassey and India become modern. When modern Indian history starts? With the victory of British. So the day Indians were defeated, India become modern. You understand the logic, but you never think about it. You very well said the modern Indian history. How did we become modern? When we became gulam of British, we started calling ourselves modern. And when we were independent, then we were calling ancient. And when we were under Mughals and others, we were calling the period medieval. Over these issues, they are very, very important. But we do not pay any attention. We simply say ancient past is ancient. No, it is not ancient past. We have to think and have our own terminology, our own periodization based on our history.
yes, sir. This is first time I have heard such thing, and I am thinking about it now.
Please.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
We'll take the next question. Rashmi Satya, if you could ask your question, please.
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, sir, for this great talk, and it's very informative. My question this is about myths and epics. We mostly heard the stories of Hidimba of Dimapur and Chitrangada of Manipur and their association with Bhima and Arjuna, who were the Pandavas of Mahabharata. So it is generally said that the tribe Assam are the descendant of Hidimba and Bhima on Ghat Kocha. So when we read the history, it is actually generally believed that these are actually the myths that were grafted by the Brahmins to legitimize their position to rule. So it's a kind of when we read the history, even in the British reports, also even the Edward Gill, who has written a great book on the history of Assam, he has even said that these are actually the myths that has been created by the Brahmins so that they are able to rule and claim a great book upon the Kshatriya status. So they belong from the Kshatriya families, a great book upon the great Pandavas. So, but when we read this kind of epics and generally we read it as a kind of mythical character. And my question is, since Hidimba is associated with the Dimasa tribe, there is one confusion also. We found one Hidimba temple in Manali in Himachal Pradesh also. So it's a kind of, we see there is a kind of archaeological presence in Manali. There's a Hidimba temple. And now we come to the eastern part of the country. We say Dimapur, which is now in present Nagaland, is the state of Nagaland. We say that they are originally from that lineage. So I want to know what's your standpoint regarding this main epic legitimate the history. Thank you.
Okay, see, one thing, I have read very few things. Reason being because I don't read one book. When I read a book or article, then I also go through all the references given there and I read them. And when I find certain references, then I go to the original source. And once I read it, then I either or reject it. That is how I work. And therefore, even reading a very small things takes a lot of time. Now, as you are saying about myth, history, and other things, this is created. If you see the evolution of these theories, kindly read the early books. The British are talking about how the Brahmins have done it, how Kshatri is done. But when the British came, the first thing they said that Brahmin, Kshatri, and British, we belong to the same group. That was the first stage. And they have a Varna system, and the textbook of early Calcutta University, where one of the one was the Muslims. You know, so when they came, they had certain thing in their mind. Accordingly, they tried to utilize our tradition. Then they found something better. Then they moved to that. And then they came where they started saying that this is how it is legitimized by the Brahmins and how it is done. So it is initially they interacted with Brahmins, they learned the things, and what you read about these early translations and inscription and everything, it was not they who were doing it. They were taking it from their friends, and we Indians are very good, you know, if anybody comes, we become very friendly and we are ready to offer everything without any cost. So we gave them all this information and then they translated them in their own way. And what they translated, the real person never knew because it's published in London or somewhere else in English, and the person was never able to read it. And why I'm saying so, I'm coming to your point on Hidamba and I'll come, but before that, I just want to tell you, just read the initial volumes of Asiatic researches and the translation of inscriptions. Some Bengali priests were reading these inscription and telling these British, because there he write Lakshmi as Lokhi, Surya as Sujo. So he didn't know even ki Lakhi is in Sanskrit or in Hindi is Lakshmi. Since the local priest or local pandit read the inscription, told the British, he simply translated it in English, Lakshmi as Lokhi, Surya as Sujo, and it is published in English. Later on, when they come to know more about this all, then they modified it. So this is how they were using Indian knowledge, Indian people, and to build their own theories. Now, as far as the Hidamba temple in Manali and Dimapur is concerned, see, when you talk about these epics, you will find in every part of the country, there are some places which are related with Pandavas, with Ram or Krishna, because they were so deeply attached or they were so close part of the traditions in India that people try to relate or to join, somehow connect with these traditions and stories. So you can find probably 100 or more Ban Gangas, and they will say Arjun just passed a arrow and this Ganga started flowing. Same is the case of Saraswati. You have n number of Saraswati rivers and rivulets in India. So when there were these major tradition, people in different region try to relate something in their own region to show their connectivity or respect or faith, whatever you call it. So again, uh, they are the traditions about the masas and all. We have to work more on that, on the local sources, traditions, oral traditions, and the histories and the archaeological sources. Then definitely we will be able to build. But again, one thing that we have to go to the original source. And our biggest handicap is that we are unable to read our own sources, our own manuscripts. They are just tied in a red cloth and kept in the almiras. We are unable to read it. So unless we read them, we will not get the new information or the real information. So that is the biggest handicap we will have to overcome. And then definitely a lot more information is available, provided we start going to original sources instead of reading the secondary sources and quoting them.
So I do want to add something to what Rashmi was talking about, this whole fixation with the myths that, for example, the myth of Hidimba in Nagaland, and the myth of Hidimba in Manali. And it so turns out that every village I go to and any temple that I see, the locals say, "Oh," I ask them, "Whose temple is this?" "Oh, the Pandavas made it. They built it over, in one night. It's 5,000 years old." And it's very evident that it's not a 5,000-year-old temple. It was made in the 9th or the 10th century by the Gujjar Pratiharas. It's so clear. But this whole wanting of associating with the pan-Indian kind of story of the saga, which builds into the Indian consciousness, which binds us all together. Because the story, like for example of Hidimba, of being a woman who sacrificed, who gave her son Ghatotkacha for the war, and she became this epitome of greatness, so much so that she is now worshipped in Manali as the first goddess. So it's this connection that people want to make, like you rightly said, that wanting to be a part of that saga. And it plays on in small places all over India. We even have a Ravana's temple, I think. Ravan is worshipped somewhere near Delhi, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm so glad that you also echo that thought when you was just answering, Rashmi, and I see it all around in the Kulu Valley as well, which is so, these myths are so popular here. So we'll take the next question, Dr. Tripathi. This is Jenny from Princeton who has the question.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here today, and thank you for the opportunity to listen to you talk. I have a couple of questions for you. The first one is, as an archaeologist, and given the complexity of establishing timelines, how do you situate a myth within a historical context, given that myths are handed down by oral traditions?
Yeah. See, as I mentioned, oral tradition, myth, history comes when you talk about history. When we talk about itihas, everything is itihas. Whatever has happened in the past. Now the myth part comes, we cannot take anything as myth because somebody has said it's a myth. I have very clearly said, unless you do the scientific study, systematic investigation to either prove or disprove it, we simply cannot say that epics are myth because somebody has said so without even understanding what is written there. So myth cannot be a category decided by X, Y, or Z. I will be happy to say that it's a pure imagination after doing an archaeological and historical study. I'm open to that. I'm not saying they are historical facts, everything is correct. My only point is an historian and archaeologist has to speak only after doing their basic work. Unless you have done that, how can you say it's a myth? That is my very basic question. So
Yeah,
there
but
is no
now,
point of archaeology.
sorry, my question is, what is the methodology that you use, therefore, to do that?
Yeah, that is what I said, that first we have to refer to the original sources. And as far as archaeology is concerned, definitely you can't find the persons, but definitely you can look for the people, the places. So the places which are mentioned, they can be searched for. And if you find material evidence on those places, on the sites, then you can say something on the basis of that. Again, it is not possible in every place and to prove everything. Like there was a case of Ayodhya. So you can find a place, you can find the historicity of this place, but whether a particular event took place there or not may not be possible for an archaeologist to prove, because you may not have the material evidence of that. So you may get certain indication, you may not get it, but you will get some sort of indication, some sort of evidence. And after doing that, if you give any statement, even after doing that, if somebody says it's a myth, it is acceptable. But saying since it's a myth, so there should be no historical and archaeological study, that has been a real problem in India so far. And therefore, not much work has been done. Lot need to be done.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is, when it comes to the excavations at Dwarka and the Ramasetu Bridge, and having knowledge of the myths surrounding the area, how do you separate your beliefs from the scientific conclusions of your archaeological findings? Do you personally believe that Lord Krishna was in Dwarka? Was the bridge man-made to rescue Sita? How do you separate your personal, your beliefs? I mean, given that you are, culturally from that area, how do you separate the two? Thank you.
Okay. I am born in a Brahmin family and I'm an Hindu and I have deep faith in Krishna and Ram. Okay, that is my personal belief. And when I was excavating in Dwarika, I was visiting Dwarikadhish temple every day without fail. That is my pure belief as a person. So that's one thing. But after excavation, my results of excavation are going to depend on the basis of the material which I excavate. And there my belief is nowhere reflected in any of my writing. Anybody can read it. So as an archaeologist, I am going to interpret the material evidence. As a person, I may have any belief or any faith. These are two different things having no relation with each other. So as an archaeologist, I will say only what I have found and which anybody can see and interpret it. And after doing our excavation, as I mentioned, we could not reach to those levels and our evidence were limited to the early centuries of Christian era. Therefore, as an archaeologist, I have no comment or no view about its association with Krishna because our evidence are very limited as of date. The same case, if you talk about Ram Setu, as an archaeologist, any archaeological remain is equally important for me, whether it's a constructed bridge or any other archaeological remains in that area. So my work is going to be investigation of archaeological remains in the area which is under investigation. And whatever they are open to all. The question of belief does not come here. I hope I'm clear.
You personally, when you go home and have dinner after you're done your work, it doesn't cross your mind. I'm just curious, does it cross your mind that Krishna might have been there?
No, never. It doesn't make any difference to me. See, I respect my father. He's 60 years old. He's 90 years old. It is 110 years old. My respect remains the same. So the age and date and all this does not make any difference in the respect and belief. So these are two different things. So I don't believe that my beliefs are going to overshadow my profession. I keep them so far very successfully separate, and I'm successful so far.
Okay, and the third question I have is about the British archaeologists. So I sense in your talk some sort of a bit of a resentment as to the job that was done by the British archaeologists, and I'm sure you have some very good reasons. I don't know what they are, but I do. My question to you is, from the time that the British left and India became independent, as an archaeologist and with your fellow archaeologists in India, what are you doing to redress some of those facts that are giving the wrong impression about the work of the Westerners? Are you keeping an open mind about the possibility that they did bring good archaeological findings, techniques to the field?
I have nothing personal against any British archaeologist or any foreign archaeologist. As an archaeologist, I have to call a spade a spade. So the very first thing, because I firmly believe it is the intention which is the most important thing in any act. And I can give you a number of examples at how intention makes a difference. The question is, you rightly said that since the British left, the archaeology in India was started by British military officers, not by British archaeologists. Okay. And now they were working with certain motives. And unless we understand these motives,
can we define what an archaeologist was in a historical context? Because when Wheeler, for example, came to India, yes, he was involved with the military and so on and so forth, but the profession itself has been redefining itself over the years. I mean, we cannot say specifically or for sure that he was an archaeologist and he had an intent. He came to discover, let's put it that way, many people who set forth in different countries, they come to discover, they come to pillage, they come and do a lot of things that natives are not happy about. But can you say that he was he didn't come as an archaeologist in the modern definition of the term? Can you accept?
You are an archaeologist. I have a very small query. What is the difference in a treasure hunter and an archaeologist?
In a what? Sorry?
What is the difference in a treasure hunter and an archaeologist in modern sense?
A treasure hunter? Did you say?
Yeah. Yes.
Well, treasure hunters were pirates too. I mean, you know, if we talk about pirates of the seas, well, you know, many people set forth, as I mentioned, to different lands to conquer these places and to eventually take their wealth and their resources. So I do not, you know, there's a we cannot talk about archaeology in that sense of the word. It's apples and oranges, archaeologists and treasure hunters.
I think,
Exactly.
you know, Jenny,
That
if
is
I
what
may, sorry, Dr. Tripathi, I
yeah,
just
please.
wanted to intervene and say, you know, like,
Yeah.
I think she thinks that because, you know, being from a Hindu family, that how do we think about this? In Egypt, for example, today we have Muslim archaeologists who are excavating the ancient Egyptian past, the pharaonic past, which had a very different religion. But as archaeologists, and like you say, we have to be neutral. It's a scientific discipline. We cannot have our religious beliefs interfere with, you know, what we are, the constructive part of history, right? And that's what is so important. And that's what Dr. Tripathi is trying to say, that archaeology is a scientific discipline. We look at material evidence. When we look at doctors who are treating patients, of course they do believe in God, but they are doing their work. You know, we let not that interfere in what we do, because we are looking at material evidence. Am I correct, Dr. Tripathi?
Yeah, you are right. What I want to tell you is again the point intention. A treasure hunter also explore the archaeological sites. He knows sometimes more than an archaeologist. He has a better understanding of antiquities, but his objective is not to reconstruct the history, but to have certain gains. It may be material gain, monetary gain. So he does what an archaeologist is doing, finding the remains of the past, but utilizing them for his benefit. So we call him a treasure hunter. Whereas an archaeologist, total soul reconstruct the past, not any gain. So that is the difference. It doesn't matter whether anybody is having a university degree or not. It's a matter of debate who should we call an archaeologist. My only point is what is the intention behind those actions? Anybody going to archaeological sites, bringing out the remains for what? And that is what I am trying to understand, and everybody need to understand. And that is what I have nothing. There are people, they have done good work. There are many things which came to light because of certain British officers. So it doesn't matter whether they were having degree or not, but what was their basic intention in carrying out those activity, that makes a big difference, because the foundation was laid on those activities and principles. Even today, if we need to change certain things, unless we repair or strong our foundation, which is weak, we cannot construct a higher superstructure. So it is necessary for us to revisit those earliest works and to find out whether we started in a right direction or not. If there was something wrong, we have to correct it down from the ground level. Then only our superstructure will become higher and stronger. So I have looking to those beginning of that. And as an archaeologist, unless we reach to the natural soil, we don't talk about the upper stratas. Okay, so we have to go very deep and understand that how archaeological activities started, how these remains were interpreted, and then because the later it's a comparative science, we are going to compare our finds today with the finds of the past. So unless we correct the mistakes in the past, our comparison is going to remain wrong. So we have to correct that and we need to revisit. Therefore, we have to see that who worked with what intention. and I am finding, means it's not that I am saying something. If you read my findings in near future, you will read the words of the author himself, that what he has written, and then the readers will be free to interpret or judge their own. I generally prefer not to give my interpretation. Rather, I prefer to put the facts in front of the wise people, and then they are free to read, interpret, and understand in their own way.
I do hope that, as an archaeologist, and that you keep an open mind as to what happened in the past, and that you can, as Sonali says, remain neutral, so that you can construct and help other archaeologists put together the pieces, so that what goes out now is something that's positive and relevant, not necessarily positive, but relevant to what happened before, and what your findings are for the future generation to know about. And I think we need to separate the politics of what the British did in India as what they've done to, what colonized countries have undergone. I mean, one way or another, there is a past in all countries that's not very flattering. So as archaeologists, we need to concentrate and be focused on, sound findings as much as possible. Thanks so much for answering my questions, and for bringing your perspective. It's nice to debate. It's nice to know that some people came before, and and you're coming after, and you're going to disprove what came before. So it's like a debate going back and forth, like a tennis court in a sense, isn't it?
I think
That's true. As a professor, I feel it's my duty to tell my students and scholars to have and follow the good practices. That's all. So as a professor, I am supposed to tell my student and scholar that these are the widely accepted, scientific, unbiased, systematic things which can lead you to a better interpretation and understanding of the past, and you should follow them. And that is what I try to do. Thank you for your very valuable questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
and also,
I personally believe that Lord Krishna was in Dwarka. So
okay. And also, Jenny, when we talk about, the changing perspectives of, how during colonial times archaeology was seen and worked upon, that is also a part of what we study, the change and the continuity, because every field is ever evolving and changing. So we have to have that reflective attitude as well into our own subjects, and see how it has adapted, how has it changed, and what is happening to it, because that's very important for any subject that we are in, be it anthropology, history, archaeology, or any other field for that matter. And I think at this point, Dr. Molly Kaushal has something to say, and after her, we'll take a question from Srishti Ghosh.
I find this whole debate very, very interesting, at the same time very, very intriguing. We are like looking at academics, whether it is archaeology or history, as if they were neutral grounds, whereas none of academics, no matter which field of study or inquiry it is, even the sciences, the so-called natural sciences, they are not ever done from a neutral perspective. And it is equally true that you cannot deny that a certain kind of hegemonic discourse did emerge with our understanding of history as it was taught to us in our schools and colleges, which definitely followed the way that the colonials looked at the Indian history. And it is something that the historians are themselves talking about, whether from the left side or from the right side. Both sides do talk about it, but still they take different positionings. And I think it should be legitimate for an Indian, Hindu or Muslim or Christian, to really look at its archaeology in terms of that, yes, these are our epic traditions. They've been called histories. So to go and look into whether literary histories or cultural histories, or for that matter, archaeological histories, should definitely be of importance to India. I think that it has been it's been too long that, only one-sided view is considered to be scientific documentary history, and other becomes as a Hindu fundamentalist history. There has to be a balance in academic thinking. And if a government of India will not provide funds to archaeology to look at the history from the point of view of how Indians before British or before Mughals have talked about history, who would? Oceanography is such an important topic. Why is its discoveries are kept so much under wrap? Because it will change the very, very foundations of what we consider today to be the world history. It will shake the foundations of from where the beginning of human race is today taken to be. So neutrality doesn't exist on any grounds. We have taken political positionings, and but that political positioning should not stop us from what I think Dr. Alok Tripathi is saying, that let us go and excavate. But if there is no money provided, there are no funds coming, and if happens to be a Hindu right-wing party and that provides funds, which it is not doing. I wish they were spending more money so that we can have a very open debate. After all, the history we think is so fine a history, when talks about Somnath, does not mention that it is a fact that the tiles in the Jama Masjid in Delhi were built by the stones from Somnath Mandir. So both sides have to give the true picture. To give half-truths either by the ideologues of the right or the scientists of the right, or the ideologues and the scientists of the left, both have to be questioned. And I think it's high time that India provided money for, I will call it, indigenous histories. For me, there is no indigenous history that is tribal history. There is a history of this territory which is geographic, which is cultural, and that is indigenous. And we need to go into the depths of knowing from where we come. For British, it's not a question of its existence, but for me as an Indian, to know my roots is my existential question. And there lies the big difference, I think, in the nature of two debates, which are equally valid, and something is right there, something is right there. But when Alok Tripathi speaks, I think that he is talking of getting into the very existential roots of what it means to have a history of India. Thanks. I mean, I just thought that, I had to say this. Yeah.
No, and ma'am,
I
also
appreciate.
a history of the disenfranchised, like the history of the indigenous, the history of what is not the disenfranchised, I would say. That is also very important. What do
Those
you
are
think?
political histories and very, very important. But it doesn't mean just because one has to do that, one has to ignore the other. We've ignored the other for too long. When even talking about Ramayana was something that was considered to be not part of an academic discourse. That's just about a decade, 2 decades ago. Till again, the British and the Western told us that, no, please go and read Ramayana. So we have to create a balance. We need to get out of our prejudices of both kinds. Prejudices exist both ways. And definitely the histories of the disenfranchised is as important, but unless you learn about that connections. And that is why Sanjay Subramaniam's connected histories is a much better term than any other kind of volatile histories. Yeah. The connected histories can be volatile, and still there are confluences that has to be taken into account.
Yes, we agree that we should know at least the truth, that we should understand that what happened, what was the intention, how it happened, and then we know the truth. The total exercise, whether it's a historical research or an archaeological research, is to know what exactly happened in the past as close to truth as possible. No one can find the truth, we understand it, but we try to go as close as possible, and that we should continue doing our job. That's all.
Dr.
And let the
Tripathi,
multiple truths,
There's
let the
one.
multiple truths flow. Let all kinds of truths
Yeah.
flow, and out of it, yeah.
Dr. Tripathi, I have a question. How difficult is it to get funding for projects such as these? You know, how difficult is it? Do you think there is a, and I'll ask a very sensitive question. Do you think like politically it really affects what kind of archaeological subjects are kind of funded for excavations?
It's a very difficult question. Actually, I have not faced anything. One project only I submitted where there was a lot of politics, which I mentioned. But I don't think that funding may be a problem for any project which is a genuine and properly planned project. There are various sources to get funding. If someone want to do good work, funding shouldn't be a problem. And India, the modern India or the present India, is a country where fund is not a problem for any good work, leave alone this history and archaeology. So fund is, I personally believe fund is not a problem because my students are working on various topics, they get good fellowships and all, and not difficult. If you want to do really something good, fund shouldn't be a problem.
So, which means that unearthing the truth and getting into these topics, which are really, I think that can really change the face of history, and getting a balanced view of what our past is, should be the focus of all archaeologists, right? And publishing what we do and disseminating that information is so, so important. You know, your work at Dwarka is so important. It like, many people should know about it. A lot of people should know about it, right? So, so maybe the digital medium is the way to do it, right?
Yeah, that's a good. Now, during this lockdown period, we have got this platform where we are getting connected to a large number of audience. Generally, earlier when we were going in the conferences, there used to be only a handful of members, but online sessions are attended by thousands. So this medium has really made a real good impact, and we are getting a lot of information from experts directly. And I'm that something good which has happened in this bad time. So the reach of scholars to everyone has become possible because of these online sessions and webinars and through lectures. And I really feel that it's very useful and very helpful in dissemination of information and knowledge. Yeah.
So Alokji, would you be willing to take two more questions? I know it's getting, we are getting closer to 10:30, but we have two more questions. Would it be okay? So we have a question by Srishti Ghosh, and after that I'll take the last question from Dr. Vibha Joshi. So Srishti Ghosh first.
Hello, sir. Hello, ma'am. Thank you for today's information. Sir, I would like to ask you about how do we find out the tenure of Ramayana characters and Mahabharata characters when some characters from Ramayana were present in the Mahabharata period? They overlapped during the Mahabharata period. For example, like the mention of Hanuman could be found even in the Mahabharata period. Like at a time there was Hanuman and Bhim, they were meeting each other. Then Parshuram was mentioned in Mahabharata, whereas he himself is another incarnation of Vishnu. And then third is that this daughter of Jambuvati was married to Lord Krishna, and that her son Samba got married to Duryodhan's daughter. So why are these how are these characters overlapping with each other when they are from both different epics?
See, the issue of dating and period is yet not addressed regarding finding mention of one in the other text. There are many things which you have to see, particularly because all these texts are not written in one day or at a time. There have been several interpolations also. So I am not an expert of linguistics or these languages and changes. One has to see very carefully. And as far as Hanuman, since you have mentioned, I just want to mention there were 5 warriors in Ramayana, and they were given a boon that they will remain on this earth forever. I am talking about what is written. So Ramayana is, even today, if you go through what is written in Ramayana, so Hanuman exists on this earth even today, and 4 other warriors. So that is what a mention comes. I'm not talking about archaeologically or historically. I'm talking about a mention in the text. So that is keeping apart. Yes, as we have been discussing for last more than an hour, that we have to study these literature carefully. We have to understand that when certain mentions are made, what was the purpose, what is the intention, how authentic or historical they are, and not much work has been done on that. And there are certain issues which we will have to face, as there was a project which was done by Professor B.B. Lal, and when he found archaeological remains, his results were something opposite, because we believe Ramayana is earlier, Mahabharata is later. But when the archaeological excavation was carried out on a number of sites and what remains were found, it proved, means it came out in a different way. So the sites which are mentioned in Mahabharata revealed earlier material than the sites which are mentioned in Ramayana. So you may have to deal this kind of situation. So there may many things may come up, and then we will have to deal these issues. Only thing is, as the previous participant has also made it, so far we term this literature, means I say the Indians are fortunate to have so much literature, but we did not make use of it, and we are cut off from that. And this all was termed as non-historical or mythical. So we were kept away from that. We are not saying that everything written there is historical and it is scientifically dated, but we have to read them, understand them, explore them, carry out the field work, and then find out that what is really there, what is the substance there. So unless we do that, it is very difficult to answer many questions. And when we work, more questions will be generated, what we have today. Because a scientific work always create more question, generate more question than what it answers. And we will have to be prepared for that. We will have to find their answers. That all will happen once we start working systematically and scientifically with the existing knowledge. Knowledge will also change. It will improve in future. But we have to have sincere, honest approach to our subject. That is what we can say right now at this point of time.
Thank you. We have a question from Dr. Vibha Joshi.
Unmuting. Hi, that was very fascinating. I especially enjoyed the slides and which introduce us to the how tough it is to do marine archaeology. Actually, we think about it, but it's not an easy task at all. I wanted to ask you. I remember. I wanted to ask you, how much do you use satellite imagery in finding out where the sites would be? I think it was many years ago that we learned about the river Saraswati, which had gone underground, and they could actually find its bed only through satellite imagery. And also, I wanted to know whether you have done similar excavations and whether satellite imagery could be used to find certain sites in Assam and what we call Northeast India. And also where you say that there is a very dense population and you cannot do excavation, whether the kind of methodology that is used in Egypt of what is it called, boring and coring. I mean, I was having a private chat with Sonali about it because I had read about this thing, that how you can put the deep core and then you can analyze the different layers and then maybe undertake excavation if needed. That's all. Thank you.
As far as difficulty, absolutely no. It's a fun doing underwater archaeology, because unless you have a love to adventure, you cannot do. So those who have a difficulty, they cannot do, or they cannot go underwater. It's it's like going in outer space. So water is called inner space. And as far as I am concerned, I really enjoy going underwater, and it's a different world, and that you can enjoy only once you go there. It cannot be explained in the words. Of course, you need to be physically fit. That is the first requirement. Those who are not physically fit cannot do underwater archaeology, and particularly if you can go to the shallow water, but 10 meter is a limit beyond which only those who are perfectly fit can go. Otherwise, it is difficult to cross that limit because of the water pressure. Every 10 meter, the pressure on the body increases, it becomes double. And then unless you are able physically, then you cannot bear that. And there are certain complex things which are issued with the breathing and all. But when you are doing deep sea diving, then you have more complex issues. But in shallow water, it's not much. So I really enjoyed working underwater, and I remain in archaeology probably because I became an underwater archaeology, the area which I enjoyed. So that is the first thing. And as far as remote sensing is concerned, yes, we have used. And let me tell you, the first book in India on remote sensing and archaeologists was done by me long back. It was somewhere in the beginning of this century. So that was the first book, remote sensing and archaeology. We have used satellite imagery, and when we were searching for Dwarika, we used remote sensing, and one site which was noticed in the Great Run of Kutch, which some scientists say that it may be a Dwarika. It seems to be a fortified city buried in the Great Run of Kutch. We explored that also. And now when we started doing remote sensing, we had very limited access. The resolution was very low, and we were using monochrome and then these false color images. But now we have even very high resolution data available, and it is very useful for archaeological explorations. So sitting at your station, you can identify certain areas, and then for ground means truth, for just cross check, you can go to the sites and can do that. As far as core and thing, what you said is difficult in areas like Dwarika, because the deposition is around 10 meter where we excavated, and on the height even it is a few meter more. So it's a very thick deposit, and if you do a small course, it's again depend on the chance whether that particular artifacts come within your core area. So it's possible to get some clue, but if you really want to understand the site, excavation, the systematic excavation is the only way where you see the things in the real context and interpret them in a real way as archaeologists do. Yes, but certain information can be gathered, and particularly underwater when you are working in a deeper areas, then coring can be helpful to have the stratified deposits there, and because the time is very limited when you work in deeper areas. I recall the deepest site we have worked was in the Lakshadweep, where we have gone to around 60 meter, and on the lowest terrace the maximum time we had 12 minutes in 24 hours. So if you are working on that depth, you cannot remain more than 12 minutes. Otherwise, then you have to undergo decompression stop and a long dive. So that's why in such areas, then you can use such methods where you cannot stay for a longer period. But for sites on the land, I feel proper excavations always gives you the better results, and you are satisfied with the remains what you find there, or sometimes you may not find there. I think I covered your points, what you have made about satellite imagery and the thing. And there are many other remote sensing method other than the satellite actually, and which are being used now by and many scientific institutions are developing expertise in that, and archaeologists are using, whether it is a ground penetrating radar or magnetometer survey and things like that, or resistivity surveys, etc., without digging, without disturbing the sites. Now people are trying to scan what is buried underground. But it is more useful for the big structures, settlement, monuments. But if you have to do detailed study, the last and the final stage is the archaeological excavation.
So, Dr. Tripathi, I do have to say Dr. Vibha Joshi will be coming next week on Sunday at 8 p.m. And this is for all of you who are listening. She'll be talking about colonial museum collections and Naga heritage, Naga textiles in the Pitt Rivers museum at Oxford. And it is an ongoing research paper. So it's an ongoing research. So I would love it if you would also join us next week at 8 p.m. For her talk. And
Sure.
and I know it's very late, but you know, I had a pressing question by one of our members in the audience. Her name is Rhythm Mishra. She's a history student, and she can't ask the question herself because her connection is weak. But she says that whenever an object is found out of the country, there is this idea of Indians thinking, "Oh, Hinduism was there." Even if you try to counter them and say, no, it is an object, it was a product of some trade relationship, you know, we scientifically and we kind of archaeologically speak the facts, but the lay person thinks, oh, this is found in Africa, this is found in Yemen, oh, Hinduism was prospering there. So her question to you is, how do you tackle a mindset like that for somebody who's not an archaeologist and is just wants to believe that Hinduism rules the world? So what do you have to say about that?
See, belief is altogether a different thing. Everybody entitled to believe whatever he or she want to believe. And nobody can convince if somebody want to believe something, okay? Now that is what a practice is, not only even in a common man, but even in the many those who are associated or related with history and archaeology. Because the kind of training or education given to them, that is what I talk about. We have serious problems with our education system. And in our education system, we do not encourage people to raise questions and discuss and debate. And particularly if you see the history teaching, it is simply you are encouraged to quote what previous work have been done without any application of mind. Because somebody has said, So you believe and take it in total. And that is where we need to set it right from the foundation, right from the training part. We have been trained in the way the British archaeologist was functioning, and more or less, of course, there are certain institutions, certain individuals who are doing very good work, very scientific work, and these are latest as per the international standards. But in general, people are still following those old practices, the pre-independence practices. They are still prevalent, and people take them as the only way of doing the work. And there are certain reasons. I'm not going in detail that why people don't want to change. There are certain reasons associated with individuals, certain groups and all, and they seems to be good for them. But definitely we need to have open thinking, because the day one when a kid goes to school, maybe in the class one, the first thing teacher comes and say in the class, keep quiet, no sound, no noise. And that is where we, the kill the curiosity, because they want to know many things, they want to say many things. But we simply say, no, listen to the teacher, whatever he or she is saying, and blindly believe in that. You don't ask question. And this practice of keeping quiet in the class, that is somewhere, we kill the creativity. And then people, we are going in a bhedjal, whatever a teacher has said, everybody, almost everybody, there are exceptions always who do their own work, but most of them, they simply follow that same thing, tradition, and then we are continuing without thinking about whether it is good in present scenario. So now we need to do a lot of things, and we really need to change. We really need to update ourselves, and that's the only way. And this kind of discussions, of course, again, are going to be helpful.
Yes, true, Dr. Tripathi. And, as you mentioned, critical thinking, even where the topic that I chose for my PhD dissertation was cultural transmission, because I'm also a product of, just listening to what our teachers have to say without questioning, and just, repeating what has been given down to us. And then when I went out of that comfort zone and I was told to question, I had to rewire my brain and start thinking critically. And that's why I chose the topic for my dissertation, cultural transmission, of how I have learned and how I teach. How has that changed? So critical thinking is so important. Self-reflexivity is so important in what we do. And with that, it's 10:40. It's been such an amazing evening listening to you and all those wonderful questions that have poured in and that you have answered. And I do hope that with this, new scenario with the pandemic, we are able to converse in forums like this, where we are closer to scholars like you, to professionals like you, who really engage with archaeology with such passion and sincerity. And all of you who are here and have been here, it's almost 11, so I really salute all of you. Thank you so much for joining us this evening with Dr. Alok Tripathi. And Dr. Tripathi, if any words that you would like to share as we depart this Sunday evening, we would love to hear those words from you.
And thank you to you, particularly to your institute, and to all those who joined and had really wonderful discussions, the many points, because it is the discussion which teaches you more than the books and other things. So I am thankful to all of you. My only thing is that unless you examine, see, and you yourself is convinced, because this is, I remember when I was a student in MA, the famous archaeologist Shri V.S. Wakankar has written a letter to me. That time I was working on Dwarika, and this was a letter just before his death in Singapore. It was his last letter. And there he wrote two lines. He said, Alok, बहुत कुछ है जो किसी को नहीं दिखता, अपना रास्ता स्वयं बनाओ, दूसरे के बनाए रास्ते पर मत चलो. And these were the words which guided me in archaeology from day one. When I joined the ASI, I started looking things from a different view, and then I kept on finding new things because I did not read what somebody has written and believe is blindly. So I tried to saw them, and if that did not convince me, I tried to find out the other alternates. And then if I could get a better interpretation, I always moved ahead with that. And that is what I say. First thing I tell to my students, don't believe even me because I'm a professor. Whatever I'm saying, you go think over it. If you feel it is convincing, then only, or if you have a better alternative, better option, go for that. So everybody should have to have his own independent thinking, and then we can definitely can contribute more to the knowledge and can help knowing our past as a historian and archaeologist in a better way. So with this, I want to thank all of you again, and good night.
Thank you so much, and hopefully someday you will come to the institute and give a lecture live, you know. So thank you so
I
much
would be
for
happy.
being here. Yeah. And
Thank you so much. Just really enjoyed your talk. I hope you get a lot of funds and you can do a lot of excavations, find out more truth about who we are and where we are coming from. That's very important for us to know. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we are doing our best. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks to all. Wish you all a very happy. Yeah.
good night, everyone. Thank you for being here. Bye.
Bye, Sonali. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye, everyone. Good night.
Good night.